Welcome back, everybody, to another episode on the channel. Thank you guys for tuning in today. Thank you guys for all the support. I just want to say that again. If you guys are new to the channel here and you've never seen the channel, we do a lot of fishing and hunting and stuff on the channel, and I upload 3 videos a week every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So if you guys don't want to miss out on that and you're into outdoorsy kind of stuff, what are you doing? I don't know why you haven't already, but hit that little red subscribe button and there's a little bell next to it. Tap that for me, and that's gonna notify you guys every time I upload a new video on the channel. Like I said, guys, thank you all for the support. I appreciate every single one of you. And guys, down below in the comments at the end of this video, there's gonna be a question for you guys to answer. So I'm gonna link it, or I'm gonna leave a comment pinned down below in the comments. So once you're done watching the video, go down there and answer that question. It's super important. So go down to the comments and let me know your response, your answer to that question. Don't forget about it. Today, guys, we are talking about everything you need to know about fishing a frog, everything you're doing wrong, okay? So fishing a frog can be a harder technique to kind of get the hang of, because I feel like a lot of people that I see fishing a frog, a lot of newer people fishing a frog, just go to Walmart or they go to their tackle store, wherever, right? And they buy a frog and they just throw it on the rod and reel. One big thing I see is, for one, their setup. Their rod and reel setup is just not what it needs to be for a frog. They're not able to catch fish, so they get discouraged using the frog. Also is the type of frog that they're using, and some things you can do with your frogs to kind of help that situation. So we're gonna go through everything that you need to know for fishing a frog, some things that you may be doing wrong, and kind of go through that. In the Midwest here, especially on the Mississippi River, guys, I absolutely love fishing a frog. I think it's probably my favorite lure to use. You can just get some massive explosions on there, big fish off a frog. You're fishing a big frog, and I just love everything about it. You get a fish on there, and I mean, you're just setting the hook to the moon hard to get that fish out of there. So I fish a frog a ton, so that's what we're gonna be talking about. Frog fishing, let's get into it, guys. Here is my box of frogs here. I have this thing just jam-packed full of frogs because I just love fishing the darn thing so much, and I have too many frogs, to be honest with you guys. I don't even get through that many of them. I have no reason to need this many frogs, but I just love frogs. So personally, guys, I don't care what brand you're throwing for frogs. I personally like using Spro frogs. That's just my personal preference. It really doesn't matter, to be honest. I think Spro frogs just hold up better. There's a lot of pike on the Mississippi River as well. So those pike tend to, hit the topwater frog. And I've noticed Spro frogs tend to hold up and actually can take a bite or two from a pike. So that kind of helps out, because if a pike tears up your frog, I mean, you have a $10 frog down the drain. Let's start with your traditional frog. So here I've got just a traditional Spro frog here, guys. It's pretty much all white with some red on there, but this is the frog. Now, a lot of things you'll notice about a frog, guys, is this top is so, like, these companies will color these like perfectly and everything, and make them look really cool. For beginner anglers, guys, do not pay attention to the top of the frog. It does not matter. The fish does not see the top of the frog. So when you guys are buying a frog, please, when you're looking at the package, I know they face the top of the frog to you. Don't look at that. It's all about the bottom of the frog. If you're new to fishing a frog, I would tell you just get a black frog. If you're just gonna buy a couple frogs, buy a black frog and a white frog. Those two colors will cover just about anything. On super sunny days and everything, guys, I will fish a white frog, something like this. And then on a super cloudy day, I'll fish a black frog. And that is just because that black frog silhouettes better on a cloudy day. When they look up, they can see that a little bit better. For the most part, I do have a favorite color in here, and I'll bust that out here in a second for you guys. But I do have a favorite color that I prefer to use. But if you guys are gonna just pick up a couple frogs to cover your bases, just get a white frog and a black frog. So back to frogs, guys. This is actually my favorite color of a frog right here. You could find these Spro frogs. I can't remember what the color is called exactly. We'll let that kind of focus a little bit. But this color right here seems to be good. Now the bottom is pretty white, and that's just being from worn down from you using it. Usually it's like a yellow chartreuse bottom on this. I think this color works really well. You can see that this frog is just beat the heck up from last year. I haven't changed it out since last year, but this thing is pretty beat up. The paint's worn off and everything. So when would you throw this type of frog? You'll notice that this type of frog just has a normal kind of, I guess if you will, nose on it. It's just a pointed nose. This frog is really good at getting around very thick vegetation. So you have super thick vegetation where there's a ton of lily pads, a ton of duckweed. It's just super thick, especially if you have duckweed mixed with some like deer tongue kind of stuff. This right here will pull through the best because there's, you know, we have a different frog here that I'll show you that has a cup on there. And this frog right here, guys, will just pull right through all that stuff. Now here's an example of the popping frog. You'll see that it has a cupped, kind of cupped head on it, so it pops in the water. So compared to this frog right here, when you're in thicker vegetation, this is gonna pull through better. This is gonna get hung up on vegetation more. So if you guys are fishing super thick vegetation, you're around a lot of different lily pads and whatnot, you're gonna wanna go with this type of frog right here with that kind of, just because it, you know, it's gonna pull through better and not get hung up. So look for a frog like this if you know you're gonna be fishing that kind of stuff. Now, where a popping frog like this right here comes in handy is because if you have a little more open water. So if you notice you have a lot of vegetation, but you got open water kind of in between the vegetation, or there's, maybe you're tossing, there's a weed line and you wanna toss down the edge of that weed line, the popping frog is a great option. One, because it's not gonna get hung up in too much grass because of this lip. And two, it's gonna create more commotion on the surface of the water. So when you're pitching it down a weed line, you're just popping this and it's popping, it's throwing water, it's creating more commotion, and that fish is more likely to strike. So if I can get away with it, guys, I will fish a popping frog 9 times out of 10, just because I think that it just has a little bit more action to it. So if you don't have a lot of thick vegetation, it's not super dense with vegetation, I'll switch it up to a popping frog. Even in duckweed, a popping frog does pretty well if there's only duckweed in the area. So look for a popping frog in those situations where you don't have as dense of vegetation. Now let's lead into some tips about the frog, guys. Now, when I buy a frog fresh out of the package, guys, this is exactly what one will look like. This is a brand new Spro frog, fresh out of the package, and you can see it's brand spanking new. Now, this is one that I use, and I've already got it pretty much the way that I want it. Now you'll notice when I put these up together, you'll notice that the legs on this one are shorter than on this one. That is my #1 tip to you guys. When fishing a frog, you're gonna have situations where bass are gonna come up and short strike it. If you guys can shorten up these legs aren't actually terribly long, actually. I think Spro's done a way better job at shortening these up. You pretty much usually want the legs, you could flip it over, and you want the legs to be even with the bait. So I suggest cutting these down and shortening this up before. I've even seen guys throw a frog with no legs at all. But I would shorten up these little strands here. All you gotta do is take a go ahead and take a scissors and cut these. One other technique that you guys can do is also cutting one of these legs shorter than the other. So if you just snip this one right here, you're gonna have one long leg and one short leg on the frog. And what that's gonna do is help you guys walk the dog. With one longer leg and one shorter leg, it'll help you guys walk the dog of the bait, which just gives it a cool action and kind of just entices the fish more. So if you're super into making sure that your frog is walking the dog, I highly suggest you cut the legs like that on the frog. Another tip for you guys is the hooks on here. You'll notice that the hooks ride very close to the bait. And here, and I'll let this focus here. See how close those hooks are riding to the bait? Now what you can do about that is you can actually take this frog and kind of just hold the hook, because these hooks go up in here. Hold it and take a pliers and bend those hooks out. Now be careful, because you can break the hooks off if you do this. But if you notice that those fish are just not hooking up the way that you want it, go ahead and grab a pliers and kind of bend these hooks up a little bit. It's gonna improve your hookup ratio just a little bit more. Now, just for a quick example, guys, I have a Booyah frog. Now, you can see what I mean about the legs on here. Look at this thing. The legs are huge on this. If you're fishing this in the water, guys, a bass is definitely gonna hit these legs and not even get the bait in their mouth. So just for example, the Spro frog does a pretty good job at having those legs already short, but the Booyah frog, guys, those legs are ridiculously long. You're gonna have to take that bait, flip it over, and at least trim it to the same length of the frog there. Now, one thing I do like about Booyah frogs, guys, is that they're super soft for one. So if you don't have a lot of pike in your area and you're just a lot of bass, I would maybe recommend a Booyah Frog. It's a lot softer. But the hooks are actually, let that focus there. But as you guys can see, the hooks are actually more exposed on here than the Spro Frog. So if you guys don't have a lot of pike in your area, I would suggest going with the Booyah Frog. I think you'll have a little bit better hookup ratio, especially for a beginner. So now let's get into the setup that you guys need. Now, I said earlier in the video that the most common mistake I see is I think people buy a frog and they throw it on their current setup. Most people who are new to bass fishing or are trying out a frog for the first time usually don't do their research, unfortunately, on frogs, and they throw it on like a medium setup now, or a spinning setup. Now you could do that, I guess, and maybe you've caught fish off of that before, but for a frog, you got to think about where this bait is going. This bait is going into super thick vegetation. It's got really big hooks on it, and you're trying to set the hook and get that fish up and out of that vegetation. Now with, if you think about it, you have like a 5-pound bass on, or even a 3-pound bass on, and you've got another like 5 to almost 10 pounds of cabbage on there because of all that vegetation that's going through. You need a beefy rod. So I recommend a heavy fast action rod with a high speed reel on there. Now, this is an ALX ICOS Hammer 7.3. It's a 7'3" rod. It's a heavy action rod, or heavy fast action rod. And I have a 7-3-to-1 13 fishing reel on here. I have a fast reel. Now I'm fishing 50-pound braid. Now you want that heavy rod because these hooks are big. So you need that heavy rod to get those hooks drove home. So when that fish hits the frog, you need to be able to set the hook with a big rod and get those hooks drove through their mouth. And if you have too light of a rod, it's just not gonna have the backbone to do it. Now you want a high-speed reel for this setup because you wanna get that fish up and out of that vegetation as fast as you can. The longer that fish is able to dive and getting through that vegetation, the more chance they have at getting off. And then you also want heavy braid. If you're fishing some super thick stuff like down in Florida, you're gonna want like 60 to 70 pound braid. Around here in the Midwest, 50-pound braid is usually what I go with. That 50-pound braid, what it's gonna do is if that braid is under any vegetation or under any lily pads, when you set the hook, that braid is gonna rip right through everything. It's instant. So I would go with 50-pound braid. You're gonna be able to spool up quite a bit of it on your spool, especially with your high-speed reel. So I would suggest, guys, once again, a heavy fast action rod. Get a longer one if you can. I have a 7.3 here. I would suggest the lowest to 7.3. Otherwise, I would go 7.4 if you could. Some people fish 7.6. A longer rod's gonna help you get that fish up and out as well. So you need a heavy setup. So along with this, then a nice high-speed reel and some 50-pound braid. Now let's talk about fishing the frog, okay? My favorite way to fish it usually, guys, is I'll throw that frog out there and I keep my rod tip usually down. Now for beginners, I actually suggest that you keep your rod tip high. The reason being is, if you have your rod tip high, especially for beginners, when that fish hits the bait, when they hit this frog, they don't usually have the frog in their mouth right away. So you wanna give it like a second or two before you set. So when they hit, it's almost like counting like 1,000, 2,000, set. You wanna give them some time with the frog to get it down and really get that frog. So for beginners, I suggest keeping the rod tip high, because if a frog hits, beginners, even myself, I find myself doing this, I get a little too antsy and I set the hook right away. If the rod tip is high, you have to allow yourself time to reel down and get all that slack up and then set the hook. So if you're fishing it high and you do end up like seeing the fish hit and you're like, oh my gosh, and then you reel down really quick and set, at least you gave the fish time, as you were reeling down and whatnot. Usually how I fish the frog is I keep my rod tip down low and I just pop it a couple times. Or usually like 2-3 times. So it'll be like pop, pop, stop, pop, pop, stop, pop, pop, stop, pop, pop, stop. Just a real erratic action. Or I'm pretty fast with it. Sometimes how I like to fish this is I just keep retrieving it, walking the dog with it back to the boat. I don't even stop it. It's just pop, 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 and sometimes that erratic action gets them. But for beginners, I would suggest kind of pop, 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 let it sit, pop, 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 let it sit kind of thing. So that is generally how I would fish it. If you guys are gonna fish with your rod tip down, Make sure when that bass hits, refrain from setting the hook right away, because sometimes they don't even have it. Sometimes the frog or the fish will come up and miss the frog, and you got to make sure you're paying attention to that frog to make sure they have it. Because if they don't have it, most of the time, if you don't set the hook and get the frog way out of there, if they do miss it, you can kind of pop it, twitch the frog a couple times, and that fish will realize that it missed the bait, and it'll come back and hit the frog again. So it takes some practice getting used to fishing a frog, guys. It's not an easy technique to learn because it takes some patience. You can't just set right away. Sometimes you'll get lucky with that, but majority of the time you gotta give them some time. Play around with the retrieve a little bit. You can do it slow, you can do it fast, you can kind of develop how you like to do it. But the biggest thing, guys, is get out there with the right setup, the right gear, and just start fishing the thing as best you can, and it just kind of change things up. Eventually you'll get used to it. All right, guys, so like I said before, there's gonna be a question down in the comments below. At this time, guys, scroll on down there, check that out, and reply to that question for me, please. That is it for you guys, everything about a frog. If there's anything I did not cover and you guys are curious about it, you can ask that down below as well. I would love to see if there's anything I missed. If there's any tips I didn't suggest that you guys do, please mention that in the comments below as well. But that is everything that I have about fishing a frog. I hope you learned something today. Hopefully you took something away from it. And like I said, remember to like and subscribe, guys, and we will see you guys on the next one.